Word Order Part 1. In this part, we're going to focus on sentence structure. The most common order of the different elements of a sentence in English is who, what, where, when, how, and why. Who, what, where, when, how, and why. A sentence usually begins with who, that's a subject, followed by what, a verb. For example, John called, or the bus returned. Notice that the subject can be a person or a thing. Now, some verbs require an object. The object is also part of the what element, so make sure you keep the verb and its object together. Some verbs take a direct object. For example, John ate breakfast. The bus hit the tree. And some verbs take an indirect object. That's an object that comes after a preposition. For example, John spoke to Julie, or the bus collided with the tree. Now, once you have your basic structure with who and what, you can add the other elements in the following order: where, when, how, and why. Now, not every sentence will have all these four elements. There will be a selection of them in each sentence. Let's look at some examples. John called. When? Earlier. And why? To cancel his appointment. John ate breakfast. Where? On the train. When? This morning. And why? Because he was late. The bus returned. Where? To the station. Why? To drop off the passengers. The bus hit the tree. How? With great force. Now, if one of these elements is composed of different parts, we usually go from the smaller unit to the larger one. For example, if there are different elements of when, the conference started at 10 a.m. on Tuesday last week. The smaller element of when, time at 10 a.m., day on Tuesday, and then week, last week. If you have different elements of where, once again, we go from the smaller one to the larger one. They live in a flat, in a big city, in India. A flat, the city, and then the country. Right, there's a specific case I'd like to mention now. You may occasionally hear a sentence start with an element other than who. This happens when you want to emphasize that element, and remember that your voice should emphasize it as well. And in written form, you should separate that element from the sentence with a comma. Just make sure that there's a good reason for emphasizing the element that you're putting at the beginning of the sentence, or you will sound unnatural. Let's look at some examples. Let's start with putting where at the beginning of a sentence. If we look at one of our earlier examples, for example, John ate breakfast on the train this morning, and put the element of where, that is, on the train, at the start of this sentence, you will notice that it doesn't sound very natural. On the train, John ate breakfast this morning, because there's no reason to emphasize this element. It's unnatural. However, if we contrast on the train with another place, for example, at the office, then we have a good reason to put this element at the beginning of the sentence. On the train, John was fine, but at the office, he felt sick. Let's look at an example where we put when at the beginning of the sentence. We had a sentence earlier, John called earlier to cancel his appointment. Let's put the element when, that's earlier, at the start. Earlier, John called to cancel his appointment. Again, as there is no particular reason to stress when, it sounds unnatural. However, if we contrast the two times, for example, earlier with now, then we have a good reason to put the time at the start of our sentence. Earlier, John felt sick, but now he's all right. Let's have a look at putting the element how at the beginning of the sentence. Our original sentence was, the bus hit the tree with great force. Put the how at the beginning. With great force, the bus hit the tree, and it sounds unnatural. But now let's add another element, make it into a little story, and there will be a reason for putting how at the beginning. For example, the bus swerved and with great force hit the tree. And then one final example, putting why at the beginning of the sentence. We had a sentence, the bus returned to the station to drop off the passengers. Let's move the element why to the beginning. To drop off the passengers, the bus returned to the station. Once again, it sounds unnatural. But now let's emphasize the reason a bit more. For example, to drop off the passengers safely, the bus returned to the station. And it sounds fine. So remember, you can start a sentence with another element than who, what, but you have to have a good reason for it. Right, it's time now to look at some common mistakes. The first common mistake is separating the who from the verb or the verb from the object. Let's look at an example. You hear, we 2 years ago bought this car. Let's color the elements. And you notice immediately that the element when is in the wrong place. It has separated the who from the what. You must avoid this. So let's put it in the right place. We bought this car 2 years ago. Let's look at another example. Sam ate slowly his meal. This time, an element, how, has separated the verb from its object. Look at them in colors. Sam ate slowly his meal. Ate and his meal are both parts of the element what, and they should stay together. So let's move slowly to where it belongs.